The crime spree, right behind you.
Let him do that, strange. Vice Mayor Strange, you'll address her properly. You can kiss my foot. Mr. Rickard, you're out of order.
FBI, we are asking you to investigate this council. Please look into this council, how they award contracts, the bid process, how they use their positions to benefit their friends and themselves, how they use their positions to attack residents and critics and neighbors and business competition. FBI, will you please look into this?
And I welcome the FBI here. If you notice, Mr. Thompson with his plea for the FBI.
I'm here at the scene of the crime spree, right behind you.
Let him do that, strange. Vice Mayor Strange, you'll address her properly. You can kiss my foot. Mr. Rickard, you're out of order.
FBI, we are asking you to investigate this council. Please look into this council, how they award contracts, the bid process, how they use their positions to benefit their friends and themselves, how they use their positions to attack residents and critics and neighbors and business competition. FBI, will you please look into this?
And I welcome the FBI here. If you notice, Mr. Thompson with his plea for the FBI and his watchdog group, this city runs the cleanest in this whole county. I guarantee
He
that.
was served a federal subpoena this
We
morning.
did receive a subpoena this morning, and we're going to cooperate 100% with the subpoena. And
Most of you who were involved up here, you gaslighted me. You tried to say I was crazy. And now we know that that's not true. And there's a lot of other issues I've been asking about as well.
As the Lynn Haven trial, the corruption case trial approaches for former Mayor Margo Anderson and developer James Finch, weird things are happening. So I told you about the motion by the defendants. They want their trials separate now that some of the charges that were dismissed have been brought back. It's gotten confusing for anybody. There's a lot of stuff in this. And so they would like it to be separate. The government says, no, we want to throw it all together. And Judge Walker is deciding on that. So when the government responded to the motion to separate the trials, they made a new allegation in a response, which is amazing and I think improper. And what they said was that developer James Finch basically was responsible for having evidence planted that led to the indictment of his lifelong friend, the mayor, Margo Anderson, and later, by extension, to himself. So I'll set it up one more time. Derwin White, who died last year, was the president of GAC Contractors. His nephew, right after the hurricane, had set up a company called Erosion Control Specialist, ECS. And ECS fraudulently charged more than $5 million to the city of Lynn Haven. The prosecutors are saying that a lot of this was because of the conspiracy between the mayor, Margo Anderson, and developer James Finch, that they had colluded basically to defraud the city in other aspects. But what got their attention on the former mayor, Margo Anderson? Well, this is part of it. The backdated invoices that, according to the latest allegation by the prosecutors, that Derwin White, GAC Contractors, had his nephew, Mickey White, who owned ECS, put in the office of ECS right before a search was conducted on ECS. And those invoices are what implicated Margot Anderson and later James Finch. So they're basically saying now that James Finch was the impetus, they are saying it, they say they have evidence for Derwin White doing that. So what's the judge going to do about this? I don't know. But I told you about it. I showed you the documents 2 days ago. WMBB wasn't telling you about that. WJHG wasn't. The News Herald wasn't, telling you about this new allegation. But WMBB did a story about the government's response, the prosecutor's response. And quite frankly, it was pretty snarky. It was pretty snarky. And I posted it. I said, wow, look at this. They missed the biggest part of the story. The new allegation that Finch set up his lifelong friend. And they planted evidence that ended up getting her indicted and, by extension, James Finch getting indicted. That's the biggest part of the story. Why didn't they tell that part of the story? Well, later in the day, they did tell that part of the story. Because the developer, James Finch, called WMBB and said, hey, y'all left a bunch out. Let's talk. Wow. Defendants who are being, who are heading toward trial in a couple months, they normally don't do these kind of things. Okay. So he basically called them and said, hey, look, you left a bunch out. So WMBB did a second story and yesterday, and they told what James Finch said when he called. It's incredible, and I'm going to show it to you and go through it with you, help you understand what's happening as this convoluted case heads toward trial right after this.
You want to look good? You want to feel good? Little John's Big and Tall is where it's at. Right across the street from Sky's Pizza Pie, 5700 North Davis Highway. You can find out more online at littlejohnsbigandtall.com. He's also a member of the iTex trading community, where your iTex dollars are welcome.
When your life is on the line, hire the lawyer who lives in our community, works in our community, and worships in our community. I'm Al Saulene, your Panama City Beach lawyer. 850-215-0628.
All right. So let's take a look at what WMBB was forced to report just yesterday. You ready for this? Brady Calhoun is the reporter for WMBB here. Defendants speak out as Lynn Haven trial grows near. That's James Finch in the picture. Let's go through it. The man at the center of the Lynn Haven corruption case spoke out yesterday, shortly after the latest filing from federal prosecutors became public. James Finch, the owner of Phoenix Construction, and Margot Anderson, the former mayor of Lynn Haven, are accused of bribery and fraud over several city projects. Finch called News 13 yesterday afternoon and listed a litany of issues he had with prosecutors and investigators over the case. The most recent was a new accusation in a response to a motion that the evidence in the case allegedly proves that Finch, quote, was the impetus for Derwin White instructing Mickey White to create backdated invoices, end quote. That is absolutely incredible. So I don't understand. Well, I have my theory, but I want to stick with the facts here. Why would the prosecutors admit that Derwin White instructed Mickey White to create backdated invoices and put them in the office of ECS when an impending search was about to be conducted? Why would he do that? It does let's be clear though, the prosecutors are not saying that that James Finch had Derwin White plant evidence. They're not saying that. They're saying, though, that's what ended up it happened. But they're not calling it tainted evidence. Okay, they're not even calling them false invoices. They're calling them backdated invoices. But the timing of this has the defense asserting that Derwin White was tipped off right before the search was conducted. Okay, that's the accurate depiction of this. The invoices and the allegation that White was told about an FBI raid before it happened has been one of several contentious issues in the case. Finch and his lawyers claim that Derwin White had a connection inside the investigation. Now, when the trial comes, if the trial comes, that is going to be a big part of it. James Finch said they forgot the policeman who told Derwin the raid was coming. He called the news station and said this. James Finch's attorneys have referred to Derwin White, the defense attorneys, who has since died and was the former owner of local construction company GAC, as the godfather of Bay County. Now, I saw them do that. This was at the evidentiary hearing in Tallahassee in federal court in March. And the defense attorney did say that. Finch also reiterated that Mayor Margo Anderson was the true whistleblower in the case. Prosecutors argue that she only came forward to the Bay County Sheriff's Office after the investigation was underway and in hopes of shielding herself from prosecution. That's what the prosecutors are saying. So when did she go to the sheriff? When did she go to Tommy Ford? It was on April 1st of 2019. April 1st of 2019. She went to the sheriff's office and said that she had discovered that erosion control specialist, ECS, owned by Mickey White, the nephew of Derwin White, had fraudulently charged the city more than $5 million on April 1st. And later provided the evidence. Excuse me. The prosecutors say in the evidence that she provided was evidence that implicated her. So the prosecutors are saying that she was not a whistleblower, and what basically she gave us implicated herself anyway. Okay, I'm trying to make this very accurate so that you know what both sides are saying. So James Finch says, when Margo went in April of 2019, April 1st, to Sheriff Tommy Ford and told them what was going on in the city of Lynn Haven, that's when they started investigating. That's when Derwin and his friends at the sheriff's department tried to pin it on Margo and myself to change the narrative. And that's what will be decided at trial. That's amazing. Don't know if I've ever seen a defendant call a news station and just say it. But that's the argument that the defense is making. Anderson and Finch have filed motions to have a portion of the case separated, so that the alleged crimes that only involve Anderson will be dealt with in a separate trial. Prosecutors oppose the move, and Judge Mark Walker has not yet ruled on the issue. James Finch says, I wanted to sever the charges because the prosecutor couldn't just throw it up and confuse the jury. There's nobody that hasn't read this stuff that's not confused. There's a lot. There is a lot. Finch added that the prosecutors have not been able to articulate the alleged crimes. Finch isn't the only one that said that. Judge Mark Walker has said that on a couple of occasions and dismissed twice count one, the conspiracy charge, and told them they don't have, endless bites at the apple, and rebuked the prosecutors and the investigators, calling them unprofessional, haphazard, and reckless. And he's told them if it continues, he'll be forced to throw the whole thing out. Finch also said they have their theory the way they think it should happen, and they have a problem with it since they have come out with their theory. Then he said they got the toothpaste out of the tube and they can't put it back in. But he says there's a solution. He said, I asked months ago, and I saw this, let's stop all these motions and let's go to a bench trial. I reported that when the court documents came out. Let the judge decide. So you can do that. It's very rare, but both sides have to agree, okay? And the prosecutors did not agree. They want a jury. The defense thinks that the judge knows what's going on. He can absorb all of this stuff. He's been looking at it for years. And rather than having a jury try to sort through all this stuff. So that's what the defense wanted. And the prosecutor said no. And so therefore it's going to a jury trial. It says Finch said the judge agreed. The judge did agree. They said they'd have to think about it, meaning the prosecutors. And I guess they don't trust the judge, said Finch. They think they can confuse the jury a lot easier than they can the judge. I thought the judge would be more than capable of keeping up with the case any way they wanted to put it out, meaning the prosecutors. So it's going to a jury trial. Finch also took issue with how prosecutors plan to proceed if there are separate trials. They wrote that they intend to take Anderson to trial first, and then if she's convicted, then they will determine if she could take a plea on other charges. Presumably, they hope that if she's convicted, she will testify against Finch. Remember, I told you there is this bubbling narrative by, I don't know if it's by prosecutors, but it's certainly by local media, particularly WMBB, that James Finch is pulling away, sort of trying to distance himself from former Mayor Margo Anderson and vice versa. But the two defendants say that's absolutely not true. I mean, he called a news station. That's amazing. And here's what he says. He says, there won't be any of Margo going against me or me going against Margo. There's just one direction, and that's not guilty, says James Finch. Federal prosecutors are often successful because defendants cannot afford a protracted legal battle. Finch said they have a 96% conviction rate because people run out of money. Another issue he raised is the idea that because Finch and Anderson were friends who went on vacations together, that meant she was essentially on the take for every Phoenix construction bid in Lynn Haven. Finch says they got to prove a quid pro quo. I'll do this for you, you do this for me. And they are saying the quid is the airplane rides and the quo is any business interest of mine that came up. He said that's a broad brush. He also defended the company's work on the 17th Street construction project. The project is one of several that are at issue on the case. Now, back to the airplane rides, if you don't know. So James Finch is a wealthy developer, has a private plane, and had, I don't know if he still does, but there was part of the indictment. Well, it'll go into that. What has been reported is that Anderson had taken free airplane rides and other stuff like that. The defense says that's not the story. So that will be decided in trial. I'm thinking back right now of all of the things that were alleged in the indictments and the new things that are being thrown into responses, and the fact that you've got one of the defendants just calling up the news outlet and talking to the news outlet. Pretty confident. If this goes to trial, I cannot wait to see what comes out. In a federal trial, you cannot bring cameras in. You cannot record them. If you ever watch a trial on the news or on a documentary or whatever, if you're watching the footage of the trial, like Johnny Depp, for example, that was a state trial. It was not a federal trial. There are no video or recordings of federal trials. That's why you see the sketches. So I will not be able to bring you video of the trials. You can go, but I will be reporting on it, and I'm sure the Beacon of Bay County will as well. And I'm not sure if the News Herald or the WMBB, of course, they're going to, I just can't call it reporting from what I've seen, but I want to say the truth's going to have its day, one way or another. And if the defendants did it, I'm going to tell you. If the evidence comes out, I'll be the first one to tell you. I'll go live right outside the courthouse. And if there's evidence that these allegations are not true, I'm going to tell you that too. But this is unbelievable that WMBB wouldn't tell you about this new allegation, and James Finch called them up and made them tell you about it. Now, this goes even deeper, and I'm going to share that with you as well right after this. It's a hot time in Florida, and my friend Ryan can make sure your air conditioning is running at peak efficiency. He could even install a new one, built to a higher standard, American standard. Find out more at PCAirrepair.com. Don't let back pain and neck pain get you down. Find relief at Brown Chiropractic Center on St. Andrews Boulevard in Panama City. Dr. Sherry Brown helps people heal naturally with chiropractic adjustments and deep tissue massage. Call 769-3777. All right, so back to yesterday when James Finch called WMBB and just, I mean, it's not always that the defense will just lay out their assertions and their defense to the press. So James Finch goes on. The 17th Street project is another one of the issues, and this was before the hurricane. He says the 17th Street ditch is one of the best things that ever happened to Lynn Haven and their stormwater problems. I loaned them $5 million and financed it for 2.5% when their own estimates to fix it was $7.5 million, Finch said. Another project that is part of the case is paving work that was paid for with the half-cent sales tax money. He said, we had paved 28 miles in Lynn Haven, and I had to invoice every month to be paid, and they charged me for every invoice I turned in. So that's some of the 16 charges, meaning the prosecutors. He also noted that prosecutors alleged that Mayor Anderson vacationed on Finch's yacht. Yeah, this was incredible. So prosecutors said that Mayor Anderson was vacationing on James Finch's yacht. And I think this was right after the hurricane. But here's what Finch says. You ready for this? Finch says, I would like them to find my yacht that they lost. In the first indictment, they said that the week after the hurricane, she was floating around on my yacht in Key West. Could you imagine a mayor doing that? But Finch said, I sold it 6 months earlier. I would like them to find it for me, being that they got the FBI, the greatest detectives in the world. So if Finch didn't have the yacht, how was she vacationing on the yacht? This will be a big part of the trial, right? Finch also took issue with America's criminal justice system. Now, specifically, what he's taking issue with, I'm also taking issue with, because I didn't know about this stuff until this trial. Basically, when you are indicted and it's a federal indictment and they go to the grand jury, which is composed of like 20 regular citizens, their identities are secret, and they should be. So when say the FBI agent goes to the grand jury seeking an indictment against, say, James Finch, the FBI agent can tell the grand jury things like you just heard. The mayor was floating around on the yacht in Key West, and there's no, the defendant's not there saying, I didn't have a yacht. I had sold it 6 months earlier. The grand jury never hears that. You can't take your attorney into the grand jury. Only all the prosecutors are basically talking to the grand jury. But here's the biggest problem that I've learned about. When you're indicted and arrested and facing trial, you don't know what the prosecutors have or the investigators have told the grand jury. That too is secret. So that's also a secret. Now, the identity of the regular people who compose a grand jury, that should be secret. But I believe that every defendant should have transcripts of what prosecutors and investigators and witnesses have told the grand jury about you. You don't ever get to see that as a defendant. They can tell the grand jury anything, and you never, ever get to see that. That's a major problem. I didn't know that. In this case, there were so many, the defense said there were so many false statements made to the grand jury that it was a pattern, and that the false information led the grand jury to okay the indictment. And they were arguing that if they hadn't been told this information that was false, that they may not have issued the indictment. Well, the judge said, okay, this may be appealed before it goes to trial. So I'm going to go ahead and release the transcripts of the indictment. That happens less than 1% of the time. So fewer than 1% of defendants in America get to see what was told to the grand jury. Now, that's a problem. Don't you believe that every defendant should be able to see the transcripts of what the grand jury was told that convinced them to issue okay the indictments? That's something I've learned. So here's what he's talking about. Finch says the grand jury, after 250 years, needs to be revamped because there's only 2 countries in the world that use it anymore, which is the United States and Liberia. It's the only time a man will go to the courthouse and not be represented. They don't have to produce all the evidence. Hearsay is good enough. I predicted they would take this grand jury system and try to take Donald Trump down with it. So, and that's happening in the news now, but I want to stick to this. So understand what I just told you, though. The grand jury is, I believe it's in the Constitution, right? So it's not something you just throw away, but it is something that can be reformed. And the grand jury was originally supposed to be for defendants so that the government can't just indict you. They have to go convince your peers that you've done enough, that there's probable cause that they can issue an indictment and arrest you. So it was sort of a buffer, a way to protect people. But basically, it's a rubber stamp now. And I think here's what I think. If every defendant were to have the transcripts of what's told to the grand jury would get much more accurate information. Wouldn't you agree? And every defendant deserves that. Finch also brought up a scandal that involved one of the prosecutors that is now on the case. It's actually the lead prosecutor, and they don't say his name here. Coons. I can't remember his first name. Coons, K-U-N-Z. The lead prosecutor, the assistant U.S. attorney. An issue the defense team has also brought up in previous filings. And Finch says, and for a real treat, read the Eisenberg case, which is by the main prosecutor in this case, this is worth looking up. In this process that's lasted for over a year now, the only one that's been called unprofessional and haphazard, among other things, by the court has been the prosecutors. That's true. Finch added that the prosecutors threatened Anderson with more than 1,000 years in prison. I believe she's in her late 60s. He said after hearing that, he offered her some advice. Quote, well, Margot, you should have told them you were going to screw them out of most of that. Oh my goodness. Only James Finch would call a news station 2 months before trial and say that. Margot Anderson responded as well Friday afternoon, says WMBB. Here's where you see WMBB's pettiness and hostility toward her for some reason. She responded on Facebook to a comment or a post because the prosecutors, I believe it was yesterday, in their brief said that they were clumsy, that the defendants were clumsy. And so it was a interesting thing to see from prosecutors saying that. And so shortly after News 13 posted a previous story to Facebook and highlighted a prosecutorial statement that Finch and Anderson clumsily tried to cover up their crimes, an account believed to be hers commented on the story. Okay, so a Facebook, it was her Facebook account. She wrote, not guilty, and I did not say that clumsily. She followed that, and look how WMBB is so petty. She followed that with 10 American flag emojis. Do you realize that if Finch had not called WMBB, the only place you would have heard about the new allegation that he was the impetus behind Derwin White having his nephew plant or place the backdated invoices that led to her indictment and later his indictment. You wouldn't have heard that anywhere but here. No news outlet would have told you that. Don't you think that's a major, that was the biggest part of that whole story? But I guess when you're a defendant, if you call the news station and just talk, which any lawyer would say, don't do that. That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I just had to share that with you. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. I'll read the comments a little bit later. Thank you for being with me. I guess when the news doesn't report it, if you're brave enough, you can force them to report it, I suppose. And that's what we just saw. All right, I'll be back with you soon.